The billionaire's hand froze mid-motion, hovering above the signature on a multi-million-dollar contract. Frank Cole had fired 17 employees that month, bulldozed rival companies, and crushed negotiations without a single flicker of conscience. Yet here he was, staring at a video feed on his laptop, unable to breathe. The screen showed her. The new maid, moving silently through his penthouse kitchen, wiping down counters as if she were invisible. Nothing unusual, except for the ring. A crude copper wire twisted around a small piece of chipped blue glass. It was a ring he had made himself, 20 years ago. Not in a boardroom, not in some luxury workshop, but in the dim basement of St. Catherine's Orphanage, Baltimore, with hands bleeding from the sharp edges of the copper. He had given it to a girl named Natalie, the only person who had ever mattered to him before the world promised everything else and demanded he forget her. He hadn't thought of her, or that ring, in decades. And yet now, staring at her hand, Frank felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years, fear. Not the kind that came from losing money or status. A different kind. A weight pressing on his chest, reminding him of every promise he had broken, every childhood vow he had abandoned for survival and ambition. She was here. In his penthouse. Wearing the ring he had made for her. And for the first time in his life, Frank Cole, the man who controlled the East Coast real estate empire, the man who bent boardrooms to his will, felt powerless. Because this wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about power. It was about a promise. A promise he had whispered under the flickering basement light to a 14-year-old girl who had no one but him, and now she was grown, standing silently before the past he had tried so hard to erase. And the question burned in his mind, does she even remember me? Frank Cole had everything a man could want: power, wealth, influence. His name opened doors that others could only dream of. Half of Manhattan's skyline bore his signature, both in stone and steel. Yet, in his penthouse, perched high above the city, a cold emptiness gnawed at him. The sheets on his California king bed were crisp, Egyptian cotton, expensive beyond measure, yet he couldn't sleep. Night after night, he stared at the ceiling, counting nothing, imagining everything. Pills dulled the edges of his anxiety. Meditation failed to soothe his relentless mind. Control. That was all he craved. Absolute control. Every boardroom, every negotiation, every interaction meticulously calculated, except for this. 3 weeks ago, Frank had fired his entire household staff. One of them had leaked information to a tabloid. He didn't know which one, and he didn't care. They were gone. He demanded a staff member who didn't exist, invisible, silent, perfect. David, his assistant, had found her. Natalie Wright, 36 years old, 15 years experience cleaning for New York's elite. Not a single complaint, no one remembered her face. She was perfect. Natalie arrived on a Tuesday morning. Simple gray dress, small bag. She nodded when David explained the rules. No conversation unless addressed, no presence in rooms he occupied, no personal effects. Then she began her work. For the first week, Frank barely noticed her. She moved like a ghost, yet everything changed. The air smelled cleaner, lighter, almost comforting. Meals appeared at precise intervals, simple dishes that triggered a memory he couldn't place. By the 8th night, he slept 6 hours, uninterrupted, and awoke bewildered. 6 hours. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Curiosity grew into obsession. Frank watched the security footage, analyzing every motion. She hummed softly while dusting, hands precise and careful, moving without waste. Her face revealed nothing, except for one detail. The ring. Copper wire. Blue glass. A child's craft, yet worn with an intensity that pierced him through the screen. And in that moment, 2 decades of buried memory surged back. The orphanage. St. Catherine's. The winters that bit through thin coats. The nights spent hungry, afraid. And her. Natalie. The girl he had promised to marry. Frank Cole couldn't stop thinking about the ring. That crude copper wire, twisted around a shard of blue glass, should have been meaningless, worthless even, but it wasn't. Not to him. Not after 20 years. He stared at the footage over and over, pausing, rewinding, studying the way Natalie's fingers brushed the counter, the way her gaze lingered on things he hadn't noticed in decades. Every motion, every micro-expression spoke volumes. He didn't act immediately. Courage had never been his strong suit. Frank Cole, the man who had bankrupted competitors with a single deal, who crushed entire industries beneath his ambition, could not confront the one person he had once promised everything. Instead, he devised tests. Subtle triggers, things only the girl from St. Catherine's could recognize. He would watch her reaction, and only then decide what to do. The first test was simple. He left a small blue glass bottle on the kitchen counter, identical in shade to the shard he had used to make her ring. When Natalie arrived, her hand froze inches from the bottle. 4 seconds. He counted them as if they were hours. 4 seconds that spoke louder than words. She picked up the bottle carefully, almost reverently, and placed it in the cabinet. She hadn't spoken, hadn't looked at him. Yet in that frozen hesitation, Frank understood. She remembered. She recognized it. The second test was more audacious. He set his morning alarm to the same recording of Silent Night the orphanage had played every Christmas. He pretended to sleep while watching her through the cameras. When the music started, Natalie stopped dusting the bookshelves. Her hand hovered mid-air. Her eyes drifted to the window, distant, unfocused, seeing something far beyond Manhattan. A minute passed, though it felt like an eternity. Then she resumed work, calm, meticulous, as if nothing had happened. But Frank knew. She saw it. She remembered every note. By the third test, Frank was on the edge of obsession. He left a faded photograph from St. Catherine's on his desk, a winter scene of children squinting against the sun. Natalie entered the room at 4:30 p.m. to empty the wastebasket. Her movement slowed the instant she spotted the photograph. Every fiber of her body went still. She traced the faces of the children with her thumb, lingering on 2 points he knew without looking. She set the photo down exactly where she had found it and continued her work. Silent, invisible, controlled. Yet the restraint, the absolute mastery of her composure, broke something in him. Frank's fascination twisted into guilt. She had been protecting him, as she had all those years ago. Protecting him from facing the past, from facing himself. And he had done nothing. 20 years of absence, cowardice, and fear, condensed into the quiet, precise movements of a woman who had never stopped caring. Every morning, he found excuses to linger in the kitchen while she worked. Pretending to read, sipping coffee, stealing glances, memorizing the way she moved. She nodded politely. Never lingered. Never gave away her recognition of him. The tension grew unbearable. Every interaction became a battleground between restraint and desire. Frank wanted to speak, to demand answers. To fall to his knees and apologize for every lost year. Instead, he remained silent, letting her continue her invisible dominion in his home. Suspense built not in explosions or dramatic confrontations, but in the silence between them. Each day brought a new question. Would she reveal she knew? Would she call him out? Would the past crush them both if he made a single wrong move? Frank's empire, his control, his wealth, all of it meant nothing in the presence of a single copper ring. The charity gala had been planned for months. Frank hated these events, the shallow smiles, the hollow conversations, the way Manhattan's elite paraded their generosity like medals. But after the staff firings had made headlines, the publicist insisted. Frank Cole, billionaire philanthropist, must maintain his image. He had instructed Natalie to stay in the staff quarters, to avoid distraction. Yet, fate, or perhaps something deeper, had other plans. Halfway through the evening, the catering manager approached him. "We're short-staffed, Mr. Cole. 3 servers called in sick. We need everyone available." Frank's first instinct was to refuse. But he caught himself mid-thought. Then, almost involuntarily, he said, "Use whoever you have, including my housekeeper." Her name had left his lips casually, but inside, it carried weight. Natalie appeared shortly after, wearing a modest black dress provided by the catering company. Her movements were precise, efficient, invisible. Eyes down, she navigated the ballroom, balancing trays of champagne with the grace of someone trained to go unnoticed. No one saw her, but Frank did. He tracked her every step, as if her presence alone could shift the air in the room. That's when Victoria Ashford appeared. Old money, old grudges, entitlement that clung like perfume. She had approached Frank months ago with a business proposal he had rejected. Now, she spotted Natalie passing by and decided to make a scene. "You there? With the tray?" Victoria's voice sliced through the chatter. Natalie froze, face neutral, movements controlled. Victoria grabbed her hand, raising it for everyone to see. "Ladies, look at this. Jewelry? Copper? Glass?" Laughter rippled across the crowd. Natalie's composure cracked, just for a second, as the ring was ripped from her finger. Victoria tossed it carelessly toward the marble floor. It bounced, rolled, finally hiding under a nearby table. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Natalie dropped to her knees, tray clattering, glasses shattering, scrambling for her ring. She had trained herself to be invisible, untouchable, and now the world saw her in chaos. Frank moved. Slowly at first, then with the authority that commanded rooms, that bent the powerful to his presence. People instinctively parted for him. But tonight was different. There was something raw, something human in his gaze that made them step back further than ever. He knelt beside Natalie on the cold marble, his hand steady, retrieving the copper ring, feeling its familiar weight, the memory of 20 years compressed into one object. "Here," he whispered, sliding it back onto her finger, the same finger he had placed it on decades ago. The room was silent. 300 of Manhattan's wealthiest citizens, frozen mid-drink, mid-conversation, witnessing a billionaire kneel for a maid. For a copper ring. "This ring," Frank said, voice echoing with authority and emotion, "is worth more than every diamond in this room. And you just insulted the woman wearing it." Victoria's face drained of color. The power she thought she held evaporated. "Get out," Frank commanded. No fire, no hiss, just absolute authority. She gathered her clutch, heels clicking, and left without another word. Frank stood, turning to Natalie, offering his hand. She rose, hesitant, dignity intact despite the ordeal. "I should have stopped her sooner," he whispered, only for her ears. Natalie's eyes met his, and for the first time in 20 years, a silent understanding passed between them. It wasn't just about the ring. It wasn't just about the past. It was about recognition. About loyalty. About the courage to protect someone even when the world mocked them. And in that moment, the scales of their history tipped, setting the stage for something neither of them could have anticipated. The gala buzz faded into a muffled hum in Frank's mind. He watched Natalie regain her composure, picking up her tray as if nothing had happened, yet every careful movement betrayed the storm beneath her calm exterior. The copper ring rested on her finger again, worn smooth by 20 years, but now it gleamed with a history only they shared. Frank's heart raced. This wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was proof. Proof of a promise he had made and broken. Proof of the girl he had left behind. Proof of the boy who had once cared more for someone else's safety than his own ambition. He retreated to his study under the guise of administrative business, but his thoughts refused to cooperate. The memory of St. Catherine's orphanage assaulted him, the cramped rooms, the bitter cold of winter nights, the sound of children crying over scraps of bread, and Natalie, small, quiet, resilient, protecting him as much as he protected her. For decades, he had buried it. Changed his name. Built walls thicker than steel. And yet, here she was, standing in the same city, wearing the same ring, the same person he had once promised to marry. He pulled out a photograph he had kept hidden for 20 years. A frozen winter morning, the children squinting in the weak sunlight, Frank at 16, Natalie at 14, a fragile connection captured forever on film. He left it casually on his desk, as if forgotten. Through the security feed, he watched Natalie enter the study to empty the wastebasket. Her eyes immediately locked on the photograph. Her body went still, rigid with recognition. She traced the faces of the children, stopping on the two who mattered most. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound escaped. She returned the photograph precisely where it had been, and continued her work as if nothing had happened. Frank felt the weight of the years compress into a single, suffocating moment. She had recognized him. She had understood who he was, what he had become, without a word being spoken. And she had chosen silence. It wasn't courage. It wasn't patience. It was trust, trust that he might remember, that he might act. That she had survived, as she always had, carrying the past with grace, dignity, and a quiet strength. The revelation struck Frank harder than any business defeat ever could. The empire he had built, the companies crushed, the rivals annihilated, all meaningless compared to the truth he faced now. He had abandoned her, yet she had protected him anyway. He realized, in that moment, that the entire trajectory of his life had been leading to this reckoning. The gala had been the catalyst, the photograph the proof, and Natalie, the woman he had once known, and never stopped knowing, was the living testament of all he had lost and all he had never dared to regain. For the first time, Frank understood. Power, wealth, and status could never compensate for the choices made with fear instead of courage. And tonight, in the quiet observation of the woman who had silently carried their shared past, he saw the full weight of both his failures and the fragile, enduring hope that remained. The night of the gala stretched on, but Frank felt time stopped the moment Victoria Ashford had humiliated Natalie. He hadn't known it, not fully, until then, the depth of his own fear, the years of cowardice, the emptiness beneath the empire he had built. Every polite smile, every handshake, every dollar earned now felt hollow. The room was a blur of crystal glasses and glittering gowns, yet all he could see was her. Natalie, kneeling on the marble floor, frantically searching for the copper ring Victoria had thrown. The sight tore at him in a way no corporate conquest ever could. 300 wealthy guests looked on, their laughter a distant echo, as if they existed in a separate world. Frank moved. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He acted. His tailored shoes clicked against the marble, cutting through the noise of the gala. The crowd instinctively parted, as they always did, but this time, fear and tension followed in his wake. People had never seen him like this, not the controlled billionaire, but a man stripped bare by memory, by regret, by love. He knelt beside her. The copper ring lay just out of reach. He picked it up, feeling the familiar weight, the familiar imperfections, the loops of copper twisted by teenage hands, the small chip in the blue glass stone. He slid it gently onto her finger, the same finger he had placed it on 2 decades ago. Natalie looked at him, wide-eyed, breath uneven, tears threatening to fall. There were no words, only the silent recognition of what had endured all these years. And in that silence, Frank spoke for the first time in 20 years. This ring, it was always yours. I should have protected it. I should have protected you. Her composure cracked, just slightly, as if the dam that had held back 20 years of emotions had begun to leak. And he saw it all, the courage she had carried, the pain she had endured, the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive while he had run. Victoria, realizing she had underestimated the situation, tried to intervene. "Excuse me," she began, her voice faltering. But Frank stood, tall and unyielding, blocking her with a calm authority that silenced even her. "This ring," he said, voice carrying across the marble hall, "is worth more than every diamond in this room. And you insulted the woman who wears it." Victoria's face paled. The room fell into stunned silence. Cameras clicked, but their sound was muted compared to the intensity of the moment. Frank turned back to Natalie, offering his hand. She took it hesitantly, and he helped her rise, their eyes locking, 2 souls finally reconnecting after decades of absence and silence. For a heartbeat, the gala, the wealth, the reputation, all of it disappeared. There was only them, only the boy who had promised, the girl who had waited, and the love neither had allowed themselves to name until now. The emotional intensity was unbearable. Frank felt 20 years of guilt, fear, and longing compress into a single pulse. And Natalie, for the first time in her life, allowed herself to acknowledge the depth of what they had shared, not just the promise, not just the ring, but the bond that had survived every obstacle, every abandonment, every silence. Frank whispered, almost to himself, "I was supposed to marry you." The words hung in the air like a confession, a release, a recognition. Natalie's eyes glistened. The gala faded entirely from their perception. For once, the past, the pain, and the promise converged into this singular, perfect moment of truth. And in that truth, both of them knew, nothing could ever undo what had endured. The gala ended, but the world around Frank and Natalie no longer mattered. The clinking glasses, The murmurs of Manhattan's elite, the flash of cameras, all faded into background noise. For the first time in decades, Frank felt something he hadn't allowed himself to experience: peace. Not the hollow satisfaction of conquest or wealth, but the quiet, steady reassurance that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Natalie straightened her dress, the copper ring now safe on her finger. Her gaze met his, a mixture of caution and trust, of years of patience distilled into a single glance. "You defended me," she said softly, voice carrying the weight of everything left unsaid. "When it cost you nothing. And that is enough." Frank swallowed hard, the words of guilt, regret, and longing coalescing into a simple truth. "I never stopped remembering. Not for one day," he whispered. The following morning, the penthouse felt emptier than it had in weeks. Natalie was gone, leaving only a neatly folded note on the kitchen counter. Frank read it 7 times, savoring every word, every pause, every careful indentation of her handwriting. "I did not come here for money. I did not come to demand promises. I came to see the man who protected me once, the boy who made a ring with bleeding hands. Now I know you. And that is enough. But I cannot stay. I will not wait anymore." For a moment, the empire Frank had built felt meaningless. His towers, his wealth, his name, they were nothing compared to the human connection he had ignored for 20 years. He had everything, yet he realized he had left behind the only thing that truly mattered. 3 days passed. He did not answer calls. He did not attend meetings. He sat in his penthouse, reading and rereading her note, confronting his own cowardice, his own fear. And then, on the 4th morning, he took action, not as a billionaire, not as Frank Cole, the man everyone feared, but as the boy who had once promised everything to a small girl with eyes too old for her face. He drove to Baltimore, to the small apartment she had been found in years before. The streets were ordinary, unremarkable, and yet every step toward her door felt monumental. 4 flights of stairs, each one heavier than the last, every heartbeat pounding with anticipation and anxiety. When Natalie opened the door, her casual attire belied the significance of the moment. Her copper ring caught the morning light, worn smooth by decades of constant wear. "You found me," she said simply. "I always knew where you were," Frank replied, his voice trembling with a mix of humility, hope, and fear. They spoke then, not of promises or apologies, but of the truth that had survived 20 years, the bond between them, the courage to face the past, the choice to finally be present for each other. Frank produced a small bundle of copper wire and pliers, not to recreate the boy's gift, but to offer something made by the man he had become. "I want to try again," he said. "Not as a billionaire or a housekeeper. Just as 2 people who knew each other before the world told us we couldn't be together." Natalie smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile in 20 years. "Then stay," she said. "And we'll figure out the rest together." Seasons changed. The penthouse transformed. Potted plants from her apartment now lined the windows, second-hand books filled empty shelves. Their life unfolded at a pace dictated not by wealth or power, but by connection, trust, and shared history. On her finger, 2 rings now rested, the original copper band and the new one Frank had made, imperfect, clumsy, yet perfect in its symbolism. And as the sun set over Manhattan, casting orange and gold across the skyline, Frank realized the truth he had spent decades avoiding. Some promises are not measured by time or perfection, but by remembrance, courage, and the willingness to face what was once left behind. The boy who made a promise. The girl who kept it in her heart. And the man who finally learned to keep his. This was not the end. It was the beginning of redemption, of love, and of finally living the life they were always meant to share.